Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion on commissioning artwork. My name is Tova Osad. I'm your moderator for today. After working in art galleries for about 15 years in New York and in London, I started my own business in March 2019 called Osad Art Management, and I deal with consultancy for art transport, customs, and high-value art movement. I'm joined today by Brian Wolf, who is the managing and creative director of Design by Wolf. They're a London-based design studio with a portfolio that includes interior design and development projects for private clients, property developers, commercial clients across Europe, the US, Asia Pacific. The studio is known for their visually rich and inventive interiors, incorporating personality, culture, and lifestyle of their clients. I'm also joined by Nick Hornby, who is a London-based artist. He's known for his large monumental sculptures in bronze and marble. He's exhibited at the Tate, South Bank Center, Museum of Art and Design, New York, and has embraced other non-gallery spaces with commissions from private collectors, as well as Vogue Singapore, Glyndebourne, the New York Parks, and as Fifth Avenue, Fashions HQ, British Land, Northacre, Kensington, and Chelsea. And finally, we have Imogen Playdell-Bovary, who is the creative director of Bromley and Bovary. It's an art and design studio which specializes in original bespoke artworks. They work with clients in the UK and abroad, and Imogen focuses on developing commissions for professional interior designers as well as homeowners. She comes from a background of interior design herself, so her process produces inspired pieces that complement and enrich her clients' spaces. So I want to dive right into this topic because I think that it's very interesting to think about relationships between artists, interior designers, and clients. So I want to start with Brian with a main question. How does and how should an interior designer decide, yes, I want to work with this artist?
Well, firstly, hello everyone, and thank you for that kind introduction. For me, my starting point will be defining whether it's the client driving the commission or if it's me personally driving the commission. If it's the client, well, the client is driving it and is selecting the artist, and the reasons that they have for choosing an artist is I have to respect them. If it's me as the interior designer, there needs to be a level of respect, open communication, respect in terms of our work processes and how we run our independent studios, but also a respect for my clients' timelines, their studios' deadlines, payment terms. I think that has to be the basis of any initial relationship with an artist. And then it's just finding the artist that fits the aesthetic or the brief of the client at the start of the project.
And how do you introduce that artist to a client? How do you bring that artist to a client's attention?
We will typically visit we've got Frieze and Frieze Masters, for example, this week, and at a different end of the spectrum, the Affordable Arts Fair, our projects are 12, 18, 24 months long. So we have multiple opportunities to visit these fairs or exhibitions or galleries in London or whatever city they're based in to identify the style that resonates with the client. Some clients will have a very sophisticated art knowledge, will know what they like and maybe have an established collection. Other clients just maybe haven't been exposed to it and need to be guided, and we need to try and get to grips with, help them identify what it is appeals to them or resonates with them for their own home.
So honing in on their taste.
Yeah.
Imogen, how do you feel that sort of comes into play if you are working for a commission, thinking about an interior designer, but also trying to incorporate taste into your creative process?
So much of the time it's about stepping back, not looking at it as an artist sometimes, and kind of just going, right, what does this client actually want? And communicating that with the client, communicating it with the interior designer, taking on board imagery that they give you, asking them questions, sometimes going to their homes, sometimes not, sometimes just, a second conversation, you get it in a flash. But a lot of the time it's about actually digging deep and asking them the information, so you're completely armed with the information so you can take things forward.
And Nick, when you're approached for a commission, what do you find is the best way to communicate, the best way to start a process?
So we're a little bit different, and I tend to go down the other route of becoming incredibly intimate. I find it an incredibly intimate process, either through getting to know the client personally or at a conceptual level, which can include, for example, I produced a wedding present for a curator, and I asked if I could rummage through their drawers, and I spent a weekend with them, literally going underneath their bed. But then after a few moments, something will switch, and the business head will click in, and at that point I have a different hat, and I want to know timeframes and budgets and requirements, and make sure that we're going to walk away from this both happy.
Right, of course, because a lot of it's interesting when we were discussing this panel before coming here and thinking about this relationship between artist, patron, and of course that's a concept that is centuries old, back to the Renaissance. So I'm curious about these relationships, how you develop taste. Do you, Imogen, find that sometimes a client or an interior designer is not on your path, and how do you?
A lot of the time that happens, always. But you sometimes, obviously this is where we slightly differ sometimes, is that I like to make sure that I'm actually creating something for someone's space. Mm-hmm. That's how I kind of work, is, ultimately it's going into someone's home, it's ultimately going to be complementing what they've already got, whether they've got curios or whatever in their space. So what I've got has to sit alongside that. If the interior designer is kind of keen on a certain idea, and he knows or she knows how they're kind of leading their design, then that's one thing, and obviously I take their lead. But sometimes the interior designer will kind of go, no, we need to go with what you think, and then you can be quite expressive and come up with something new and fresh. I know that you're very good at kind of being playful and strong with what you lead with your mind, but sometimes I take it from past artwork that I've created, and they kind of go to my catalogue and say, I just want this fit. Yeah. I think I'm making sense.
You're making sense. I think it's interesting to have both sides of the equation on a panel like this, so I kind of want to play with that a little bit, because why not? So starting with Brian, what do you feel is the best way to communicate a vision to the artist? And then I'm going to switch that over to you and ask both Imogen and Nick what actually works and maybe what doesn't. So what do you find helpful? Because you're the middleman between the client and the artist.
I think understanding whether your client has a sophisticated art knowledge at the outset is really important.
What do you define as sophisticated?
Somebody who has a knowledge of artists, perhaps collects already, goes to galleries, exhibitions, has a general interest in art in general. That sort of sets a tone. Friends will have commissioned pieces in the past. Their parents may have commissioned pieces in the past. They themselves may have commissioned in the past. And it's important to understand their prior knowledge or their prior experiences, good and bad, so that we can either match it, better it, or change the perception of what that process was like for them in the past. And it's the same as an interior designer. We have clients who hire us, and their last experience or their parents' or friends' experiences of using an architect or a designer had gone horribly wrong. So it's our job to identify that early on and make sure that we're not making the same mistakes or giving them the same experience and leaving a better taste in them out afterwards. So once we've defined sort of the level of sophistication or the prior knowledge, some clients can't visualize things in 2D. We will work through a variety of mood boards and concepts with our clients way before approaching an artist. We can't approach an artist until we know what the look and feel of the property is going to be anyway, and defined a budget, more importantly. We will already know at that point how they're responding to certain presentations. Does 2D and plan work? Are they needing 3D visuals? Do 3D visuals overcomplicate the process and confuse them more, because then they're latching onto a rendering that isn't going to be lifelike, and there will be changes in it, because we're dealing with quite often natural materials and natural forms, and you can't recreate something perfectly, or you shouldn't be in art anyways. Different in sculpture, but in painting. So it's trying to define where the risk points are. So, I will quite often in my work say there are no renderings for this client, because I don't want them to latch onto something that they see in a computer-generated product, and will just force them down the mood boards and material boards where we're just giving them materials and showing them how the material can change. You know, one piece of marble that they might sign off on now is very different to the actual marble that will be carved and on site, because it's natural, it's made by nature, we have no control over that. And then we can guide the artist on, okay, this has been our experience so far with the client, this is what they respond to, this is what I recommend we stay away from. It will also dictate quite often what artists we don't work with, because if a client does need very sophisticated renderings and drawings and details, and we need to incorporate those elements into our own visuals, but they aren't able to provide us that supporting material, that's a pain in my ASS, and it's not going to be an artist that's suitable for working on the project with me, and I'll avoid the headache at any cost.
So I want to throw that over to both of you. Nick, you are more familiar with commissions in the slightly sort of more public spaces. How do you communicate with clients? And commissions? And where do you find the creativity amongst what is being asked of you?
Yeah, so firstly, it's always really flattering when you get to do a commission. It's quite a sort of, it's a wonderful privilege. But it's not without complexity and problems in terms of expectation. I like to try to get to know them quite well, because it's not...
You're not allowed to come to my house and look under my bed.
It's not quick and easy. Typically, in a year or several year overview, you're working on exhibitions. And my regular practice has cliffhangers. You make an artwork, and the next artwork is going to be spinning from the last one. And that's a perpetual chain which just goes off on its own. And it requires, in some ways, very little effort, your own practice. With a commission, is a massive rupture. You have to stop what you're doing and allocate, it's context switching, and allocate a completely different part of your brain to try to fall in love with the commissioner's vision, which might have absolutely nothing to do with your own practice. Hopefully there is an overlap which you try to tease out and then dive into. So in fact, that's one of the things which I really try to talk about with the commissioners, so that they understand that if they want me to engage with their narrative and their site, it can be as much work to produce a single sculpture for a single client as producing an entire solo exhibition of 30 pieces. Yeah. In fact, often more so, because you're sort of starting from scratch. In terms of good practice, there's such a broad range from tiny objects to monumental things. I try to encourage a studio visit, because if the client is able to travel to where you are, then you can learn so much from like half an hour in a studio. You can kind of understand everything about the artist. Where that's not possible, then videoing and such like. And then, trying to understand expectations really clearly, and putting the business hat on and transferring that into a document, which clearly, a contract effectively. And I'm a real believer, if it's a monumental project or a microscopic project, in having quite a clear contract, because that avoids all of the potential arguments you might have at a later date.
I want to get to contracts and that in a minute, but first I want to know more also about Imogen's creative process and how you bring that into the fold.
I love to play as well. Everyone does, especially as an artist. You have all this stuff in the house that you want to kind of draw upon and kind of match to your project. So one of the things that, because the original question actually was about how we link with an interior designer and a client.
But how your creativity comes into
how you're creative within that. So a lot of the time, it's about bouncing off the information you've got, storytelling, like anything that we do. As an interior designer, it's all about a story from start to finish. It's the space in which you're doing it. As a piece of art, it's about being creative from start to finish. If you want it to stand by itself as its own entity, and if it's on a pedestal, that has to glow within its own right. If I'm developing something in that situation, it's very different to saying, actually, I'm working alongside the situation in which it's going into. My bread and butter tends to be more on the side of, actually, Imogen, I really want this whole house to flow. I really want it to go within, to work alongside. these materials, like the natural materials, the organic materials. Think about water, think about where the location is. So when I come to creativity, it's probably more a sense of what materials will fit within that environment. How can I work with what I've got in front of me that work with what they need? I then kind of go, right, how far can I push this client? How you know, can we be overexpressive? Can we kind of come up with something really funky? Or, you know, is it going to be just literally two colors in a space? So creativity, it kind of starts when you start that story, start that journey, start that, you know, storytelling, and then the next step goes straight into me playing. Like every artist, we all like to come up, use our imagination, play. Even in the design industry, I spent, you know, my history is from that world, and, you know, color, how the color goes together, how, you know, the walls are going to match with the art, how that final situation is going to come together, and the person who is ultimately going to fall in love with what they're going to live in, which is what we kind of all do it for, or outside space or whatever. So creativity in my world is more about understanding who it is you're communicating with, digging deep or not, and playing, I think is basic way of saying it.
I think it's important to say, you can, as a designer or a client, be somewhat controlling in the brief to any artist, but you can find ways of helping the artist be creative. One commission we did with Imogen, the one for Highbury Crescent, client couldn't imagine things on renderings or drawings, so it was pointless going down that route. I think for that project we started by giving you images of the finished space, guided you on the colors the client likes. You created a very simple A4 canvas with the colors you were going to use on it, and the size of the blotches represented the amount of that pigment that will be represented in the overall. They signed off on it. Yeah, exactly. And then we went into them looking at your past works, and they gave you examples of what was too much movement and what was too little movement. And then from there, you played, and you were very good at providing stage updates of, this is where we are, this is not the finished piece, but is the amount of movement here what you were imagining? Do you want more of it? Do you want less of it? And then it was the introduction of the colors. And I don't think there were tiny changes at each point, but it landed on site, and the client was like, yeah, this is what we commissioned. And it was done.
That's how
That's good.
Yeah, and they were very happy.
Yeah.
But in that circumstance, you know, we knew the kind of ultimate goal was to fit the piece within the space. So we were restricted in a certain way. I had to have a jigsaw piece to that environment. And that is actually a lot of what I do. So I communicate a lot with interior designers, do samples, swatch boards. They can go on their palettes. I can even, you know, do a few design ideas sketched or hand painted, whatever, and take some pictures and send it over beforehand. Obviously, I can't go too far if it's not part of the process, but, you know, then we kind of go straight into it, and I have a full story before I start working, rather than it being a part-time bits of information I have to kind of pull back on.
I'm curious how you both said something about pushing your clients a little bit in your direction. I'd love to know how you do that, and I'd love to know how you, when you know that that's happening, and how you respond to it. So, starting with Nick, how do you, if you're commissioned to do something and you have a direction that you want to go in, you're not quite, if this ever happens, you're not quite sure, how do you convince your patron, your commissioner, to come round?
Yeah, I mean, normally I start with another drink.
Second that one.
Stiff drink.
Many.
No, I mean, I probably would say it's also very important to be very happy about walking away and teeing up the idea that you might not find that intersection. And if you don't, that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, when I'm doing a commission, I'm shortlisted with 2 other artists. There'll be 3 of you typically. And some of my friends are like, God, is it a bit gutting when you don't get the gig? And I never take it personally, because there might be 3 fantastic ideas that respond to the brief perfectly, And they're all going to be very different. One could be a shiny ball, one could be a figurative sculpture, and one could be something colourful and completely loopy. And the commissioner wants that piece. If someone has seen a single piece of my practice and is really drawn to it, but I've gone off in a different direction and I can't revisit that, it's going to yield bad art if you can't find that intersection. I typically respect the commissioner and the designer, and if we don't organically find it, then I will walk away. So I think it's really important that you start off with the caveat that it might not work, and if it doesn't, you haven't failed, they haven't failed, it hasn't aligned at that particular moment.
What is bad art? I can't help it. I have to ask.
I'm not answering that question in public.
You said it, not me.
I would pick up on, though, what these guys were talking about before in terms of play and parameters. Yeah. And I think it's worth saying that, again, I have to caveat everything I'm saying today with, it would be nice to walk away from a tool like this with a checklist of good practice and rules, but typically there aren't any, and we have to play, and we have to play within parameters, and you as a commissioner has to work out how broad or how tight those parameters will be. And from my experience, sometimes I've produced the best work within incredibly narrow and specific parameters, and sometimes if people are too prescriptive, that can crush any idea. So play can happen between millimeters, or it can happen within a completely empty space, which is, I think, the heart of.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and how do you? So, same question to you.
How do I push?
Yeah, you said sometimes I like to push clients. How do you do that?
How do I specifically push clients?
No, but I think it's important to think about that. Coming from a gallery world, I am very familiar with the, come on, I know that this is your taste. You might not see it yet, because I used to work with Italian gold grounds. I mean, hello. But, and how to sort of massage the idea into a client and interior designer's mind that actually you really do think this would work, and to be open to that. So I'm curious how you...
It's information.
Yeah.
It's as simple as making sure that you're communicating. And it's like anything that you're going to commission, whether it's a piece of art or a dress, you need to give the right information to get the right results if you're very specific. But if you're open-minded to what someone else can create for you, that's a different question.
Right.
I wouldn't say I necessarily am very pushy. I would say, and I probably would turn around and say, that's not something I can do. Like, as an artist, you can't do everything. I am not a technical. I can't draw a person as you sitting there. Like, that's just not my thing. But I can admire it, and I can give you the right information for the right person who can do that. And I think that's the understanding that everyone has to go into this for. You just have to be able to say, I'd love to help you. Next time, maybe I can if it's down this route, and I can encourage you down this route, not be pushy. But actually, if you're really wanting something that's really specific, here you go. Here's the information, and be open, because everyone out there's loads of artists, and you can choose from loads of people. So I'll help you out. Like, they're all your friends, and work in the industry with us. So be positive about other people as well.
What do you think? How do you respond to?
Depends. I'll do a risk analysis first, and that starts with assessing who my client is.
Right.
So what is their previous exposure, their experience, how have they responded to our initial work with them, have they liked the pushback that I have given on various elements, or are they very rigid and not open to new ideas? If they have enjoyed the journey to date and they've been somewhat playful within it, then I don't mind third parties involved in various elements having the same playful approach to their creativity as we've had as designers. If, however, I have hit a brick wall every time I've brought a concept that is out of their comfort zone to them, then I'll detach from the artist immediately. I'm like, this is not going to work. I'm not wasting my time. I'm also not wasting your time. And I'm certainly not going to end up in a battleground with my client just to try and get this art into the project. But if an artist has a great concept and we have a playful client, a client that's open and sort of welcoming of new ideas, new concepts. Great, go for it. Let's go for lunch, let's go for dinner, studio visits. Let's go to galleries so that they can see similar finished pieces, get them some books, coffee table books.
Is
Get
Nick
them
allowed
excited.
to go through their drawers? Or?
Depends on the client. I'll have already done it anyway. So.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah.
When you talk about exposure, you've mentioned a few art fairs. Frieze London and Frieze Masters are this coming week. Affordable Art Fair.
The week after?
Yes, the week after. What else is there? How else can you bring your client into a fold where you can start to have these conversations about commissioning artwork?
I think as a designer, it's incorporating art into your visuals, your presentations very early on. So the first thing we do is separate the budget out. We have an FF&E, and it does not include any art. The budget for that is completely separate, because you can find prints for a tenner, frame them in an IKEA frame, and they'll still look great. For a client that has no knowledge or experience of art, or you can be spending whatever on a piece of a piece you get commissioned. So it's defining very early on everything that is hanging on the walls that are not wall lights or wallpaper is a separate budget. Then we'll introduce imagery, that sort of styles of art, periods of art, mediums of art into our mood boards for the spaces. For example, if we've got a curved plaster spiral staircase, there may be some sculpture at the bottom that you're looking down through. There may be wall art on if the staircase isn't hitting the wall, and you've got this floor to ceiling, floor story feature wall. How are we decorating that? What kind of art works in a space that is somewhat obscured but can carry through the whole house and give some degree of continuity? We have to have identified that early on, and what do we think is going to work in those spaces? So dropping the imagery in, or the styles or the mediums of art, I think is even more important, into our mood boards to say this is, then they're signing off on the interiors and the layouts, already having suggestions on, oh, that will be a sculpture, or that will be a wall sculpture, or a wall treatment, as opposed to a gallery wall of pictures and postcards. So yeah, I think that's how we guide it from the start. And they've almost decided by the time they've signed off on something, oh, well, that sculpture has always been in that place, so now it's obvious it's a sculpture, so great. What was the style of the sculpture we had put in? So we've already identified what we would have wanted to use. Sometimes it gets dropped out immediately because they'll say, no, we're not having a sculpture, the kids will destroy it, or the dog will pee on it. Yeah.
Why is medium so important?
Because we will want to bring in texture as well as color. So whether it's plaster, stones, marbles, wood, carvings, is it something that is very symmetrical and done on computer-controlled devices, or is it something a lot more organic, and that will resonate with the interiors that we're creating for the client?
I want to move on to the business of this, because this is a business. This is, money, time. Contracts, how does that evolve? Does an interior designer come to an artist and say, here's the contract, and then what do you like in a contract? What do you dislike in a contract? What should you expect an artist to be okay with? What are you not okay with? And back and forth. So I'll start with Imogen, because
I guess there's a fine line.
Yeah.
So I think you can't expect someone to sign off and put a lot of money down on something they've never seen and just an idea. It's never going to work, unless maybe you have done lots of things in the past and it's going to be following on from that. So the way I start is I do these design documents where it's ideas, and it's ultimately a brief that follows on, can maybe have a few bits and pieces dropped in as furniture that kind of works alongside, so I can sell it as an elevation, or as the story, the whole finished picture. Where it gets a bit tricky is with anything, like if someone changes their mind several times, or they haven't got on board, and actually you've done a lot of work, and at that point I think it's going back to the question of saying, actually, hold on a minute, am I right for this? And you questioning it as well as talking to the direct client or the designer. So there is a fine line, but like anything, you will obviously go a certain length, and then you might go a few steps further, and then you have that final conversation. But when, that's exactly the same as designing a piece of furniture or making 3 changes in with a sofa, or you have 3 variables. Any contract has a certain point where they stop. And I think with me, it's I do the brief, we talk about it, and then we maybe make it a couple of changes, but then we have the conversation that's quite cutthroat. And if the price is wrong, again, that's another thing. You have to kind of say, look, I can give you this much for this price, but I actually can't do any more, and I'd love to help you, and yes, I'd love to have this piece in that amazing project, and yes, I'd love to do that, but I can't necessarily do that for a developer spec or a really low-end budget, but I can, again, give you the information to maybe find it somewhere else on another platform.
Right.
But it may not just, it's more about where you are with the client. And again, back to that fun conversation, but communication.
Yeah. I think that's been a key theme. Nick, what about you with contracts? What do you...
Yeah, so I typically have 2 stages. There will be an initial invitation to tender for a brief, for which there will be a fee. And then if you win the brief, at that point you engage in the process of drawing up a contract. Typically, I'm talking about in the public realm where production budget for the overall thing could be somewhere between 50 and 250 grand. And at that point, and that could be like a 1%, for example. And in those situations, typically a fee for drawing up a response to a brief will be somewhere between, at the lower end, 500, which is a bit miserable, and then up to 2.5 or 5 grand. And that's really important. I very rarely will invest any time into something if that isn't acknowledged from the outset.
So the value of your time.
Yeah, I mean, to respond, to pitch for something is a huge investment of time and effort.
Yeah.
If someone wants a portrait of William Shakespeare, then you have to reread all of the plays before you're going to embark on having an idea, which takes time. And then in terms of the contract, I'm quite ruthless with them. I drill into a lot of detail in terms of, obviously I won't do this, the commissioner will produce the contract, but I will scrutinize it, and the things that matter to me are images of the work. I'm always very, very, very particular about who will produce those images and where they are permitted to go and who has rights over them and copyright. For example, if you work in, if you design something for a hotel, you don't want to find out 5 years down the line that they're using a picture of your sculpture on the menu in the bar without your sign-off, or they've cropped a detail from a sculpture and they're using that on a brochure. And things like aftercare, if you're producing a bronze that goes into a garden, then typically it will require maintenance. It will require rewaxing every year, and those sort of details are really important. So you need to think about the journey towards reaching an agreement about the object or image or whatever, and then you also have to think about the lifespan of this thing until for eternity, because often artworks can last many years after you die. Legacy.
I love that idea about aftercare. Does that come into play at all in a lot of these?
With every commission, whether it's furniture, sculptures, art, specialist flooring, we will guide our clients and make sure that they're aware that everything needs to be maintained. Otherwise, it will be no more after a period of time.
Right.
There's normally a maintenance book that it all can be linked to. So it's part of at the end of a big interiors project, you'd basically say, this is the sign-off, this is the end of the project, do you like it? We've got through all the snagging, and then you'd hand over your massive folder.
Don't put it in direct light, make sure it's all of those things.
It's really fun.
How interesting. What happens when it all goes wrong? So you've gotten past the...
Drink.
More drinking. That's another theme. Because obviously there's a point where you've decided, there's a contract, but you've produced something, you've received something, it's not what you wanted. It's not.
It doesn't typically go wrong at the end, though, with art commissioning. I think it's in the journey, and there is a way to get out at that point. So that as long as there's mechanisms and agreements for various stages, if we're working with art, and it has happened many times, either the relationship breaks down, and that's typically because of poor communication or personalities or attitudes clash during the process that wasn't identified early on. Somebody having a bigger ego than the other type of thing is something that happens a lot with our clients and with artists. And that it's not a negative reaction often to the artwork. It's more that one isn't listening to the other, or and that's, as long as the designer is aware going into every commission that typically does happen from time to time, and you're always going to be stuck in the middle. Your client is your client, and you have to protect their interests. You also need to protect the artists. So it's being a good mediator and helping bring people to the table, or their reps to the table, to calmly work it out. What's a fair remuneration for this point? It's great if the deposit has already covered the work that's been done to that point. What has happened sometimes is an artist will say, oh, we actually want to finish this, and if we end up selling it, we will pay you back what we have been paid by you, and that makes it an easier exit. And it's a willingness to have a conversation. Sometimes you need to let people cool down and then come back, but it does go wrong. It's a commission.
And what about the artist side? How do you?
Never goes wrong.
Never.
No, always. The projects always, have their ups and downs. I think. So recently, I have an amazing client who has such an eye for colour, like unbelievable, to the degree that you're kind of going, this is such a special talent, but why are you not working in the industry? And actually, I sent her samples and everything else, and you kind of go, she's like, that's not right. But what was happening was the colour was mixing when it was wet on the page, so it was creating different colours. And so I basically, just had to take a breath and go, you know what, it's my technique. I'm not getting it right because the colours are mixing and it's not what she wants. And she's told me that, like, from the get-go. So you've just got to kind of go, I'm going to check in with the information I've got. I'm going to, I write notes like you won't believe, and just kind of say, she said this from the start, and actually just have a minute and say, yeah, I can sell that other piece or whatever, and I'm going to just start a new one. With anything in art, the amount of stopping when you're meant to stop, or actually don't keep going if actually you think it's strong, and perhaps at that point give it to the client, and they can then read it and say, actually, I want to make these changes or whatever. But it does go wrong. Always, I'm not saying always, but I'm not human. You're only human. You're not going to kind of come up, you're not going to say everything's perfect. But yeah, it's about understanding where you can stop, reflect, and take a breath, and either start again or, move on, have a conversation. And
yeah, I think most artists tend to factor a percentage of failure into their business model,
right.
And just don't take it personally. That said, if you have a good contract, then yeah, you end up in a situation where you might litigate, and being prepared to do that from the outset is very important, because these things really can matter, and the numbers can be quite large. So yeah, you can shift from puppy to wolf if need be.
Okay.
Also, art is the eye. The beauty is for that person. So even if you don't like it, they may love it. And that's happened to me several times. So it goes to, you may think it's going wrong, but actually, I've had so many clients love something that I've not thought, I didn't think it was strong, but ultimately, they've commissioned me.
Yeah.
It's for them.
Of course.
And that's where you've got to just keep telling yourself, it's not actually something just for me, it's for them, and I'm doing it for them. So I think that's the main thing, is as long as they're happy, we're happy, and we're good. So.
I'm conscious of time, so I wanted to open up for any questions. Yeah.
Oh.
We're going to get you a microphone.
Hello, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Just a quick question. How do you get your pictures?
What do you mean by pictures?
So all of you, play your part, the artist, interior designer, etc. But, you're talking about really big collaborations there. and you're talking about, as you said, between £500 and like 200,000 or so on and so on. And I'm asking you, how do you meet those clients? How do you find your audience, your target audience, the people that are going to pay you to do exactly what you're talking about?
You're talking about how we as artists
Exactly.
become invited to do these things.
No. I mean, obviously, an art agent will take you on in a breath. You know, you're hugely talented. They'll literally, knock down the doors to take you on. But I'm asking, okay, say, for example, you, how do you find the clients that will pay that 200,000 to commission his works?
I think that's a different sort of conversation and a different panel discussion. That's business development. That's your marketing 101. That's bettering your project each and every time, making sure you leave with good references, and clients are so happy that they want to refer you to their friends, and you grow with the clients. If you're not delivering successful projects each and every time, and that client doesn't want to be your biggest champion, then you're never going to grow as a designer and grow with the clients. I don't know. I think you just you start, you deliver a project, and it gets better and it gets better, and word of mouth. Yeah, you don't go from zero to hero. You start at the bottom and you work your way up. Yeah.
Are there any other questions?
There's one over there. No, it was on that side there. Yeah.
Hi there. This talk's been really interesting, and I just wondered, have you got any tips for managing the emotions of the journey? Because we all know that art can be so personal and so subjective, and it varies from person to person. But whether it be client or designer or the artists themselves, how do you actually manage the emotions of the journey? I just wondered.
Emotions are part of any interiors project when you're working with residential clients, because it's their home and they're going to live in it. For me, storytelling is really important. So as long as I understand the story they're wanting to tell on the property and the emotions behind that story, what is driving that design journey, I think everybody can get on board with the emotions, the artists, the specialist trades, or everybody on the design and architecture team. As long as you believe in the story together, it's not just one person's emotion. It should be a collaboration, and so the bringing together of everybody's life experiences and emotions on that particular topic around that brief. Emotions, when it go wrong, are very different, and that's just hot-headed. That's that's just a clash, and they're here today and they're gone tomorrow. They don't last forever.
I find emotions a funny one because it's, as a designer, it's basically cutting it before it goes wrong. You know, you're having to get to that point. You know where this cog is kind of going wrong, and you have to just diagnose where it is. Like, we all have conversations, we fall out with everybody or anybody for no reason, but you know when something isn't right, so you stop it then. And it's the same in business, and it's the same in design, it's the same in creativity. If you feel like something's going wrong, do it early. Stop, have that conversation and put it right.
I don't know the answer.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Imogen. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Tova.
I hope this has been informative. And have a lovely day.